Thanks everyone for joining. This is our third roundtable. We've completed two roundtables so far. The first one was about employer of records and legal entity setups. The second one was all about blind spots to avoid when moving internationally, which stimulated quite a lot of interesting stories and insights from various people. There's also been a number of actions that have come off the back that we'll share separately, that, you know, some documentation people are looking for when they're moving from country to country within the businesses, as well as things such as like a decision tree when you're looking at legal entities and employer of records in options in different countries as well. So it's brought out some really interesting discussions. Obviously, here today we're here to talk about the talent side, so looking at talent availability across the globe, looking at the skill shortage subject that I know has been around for a while. Many of you have asked some questions either through the form when you signed up or via, well, from talking to me one-on-one before the event, so we'll kind of touch on some of those things. Just before we bump straight into things, the bios of everyone have been distributed yesterday, so we're going to jump straight into it in the interest of time, because we tend to find there's too much to talk about by the end of these sessions. Just to mention as well, for those that haven't been on here before, it is an interactive roundtable type event rather than, you know, kind of what I would call more of a presentation based webinar. So if you're able to keep the cameras on, that's appreciated. If you want to jump in, there is a text, a chat box at the bottom. Feel free to use that. There's also a button somewhere that allows you to raise your hand. You can use it if you want. I don't think anyone has yet, but if you want to and you can't get in because everyone's talking too much, then by all means. So one thing I just wanted to mention just before we kick off, and I know Emma's going to send around some information in the chat a bit later, but we've just launched our WhatsApp group as well. So that's a place for us to basically continue the conversation after the roundtable event about this topic or indeed any others. So Emma's going to send you a link to basically invite you to join that if you wish to join it later on, and sort of keep the conversation going basically about all things HR. So anyway, so Becky, good to see you, by the way. Sorry, I just saw you pop up on the screen. Just to kick off, I was going to pass it to you, Megan, actually, because I know you mentioned that you were looking to gain some insights kind of at quite a macro level about hiring trends, recruiting trends globally. So just wanted to kind of get some insights into what you'd like to understand a little bit more. And then, you know, maybe James, you're one of our experts here today. Maybe you can kick things off and give us, give some insights to the group.
Sure, happy to. Thanks so much. And thanks for having me, Chris and Charlie. It's a pleasure to be here. I am curious about all things global recruitment. So our organization is based here in Canada. We were recently acquired by Canon, the large digital Japanese brand that we all know and love. And so we've now got sort of more of a global view on scaling our business. We are about just over 225 people right now, and going to double in size over the next sort of 3 to 5 years here. We're going to go on a little bit of a hockey stick trajectory here. And so for me, it's really interesting to think about, Canada is a reasonably small talent market. North America more robust, so that's exciting for us. But I'm really curious to hear about what the trends are, sort of on a global scale, what challenges people are dealing with from a competitive perspective, from an economic perspective. There's a lot going on in our world economically right now, and so those are kind of the things that are top of mind for me right now.
Well, I'm happy to pick that up if that's okay. And again, thank you, Chris, and everyone for inviting me on here. You put me down as an expert. I'm not going to claim to be an expert in anything whatsoever, so I refuse to have that one as a title. But I do have a few opinions about a few things. I advise recruitment organisations, and we work with recruitment organisations all over the world. So we get a bit of a sense of how the agency world, I suppose, is seeing things and what's coming off the back of that. I think the reality is pretty simple at the moment. There is a huge issue when it comes to skill shortages around the world, and just about everywhere. There was a study fairly recently, I think they said that by 2030, we're going to have a global human talent shortage of about 85 million people, which apparently is the equivalent of the population of Germany. So that's obviously a big issue, and I don't think it's getting sorted or solved anytime yet. I think the rise of the robots, the rise of the AI, etc., will have I suppose, to an extent, a positive impact on that. I think what a lot of people forget, though, with AI, as an example, it will probably create a demand for twice as many jobs as it will get rid of the jobs as well. So that's a bit of a reality check for all of us, I think. Our businesses will all become very heavy AI driven, and more so than they are today, and that will require different skill set, different talent pools, and so on and so forth. So I think there are some fundamental issues that we're facing, and I can't talk directly towards the Canadian market, Megan, so apologies about that. I do know, however, if you look at certainly the US market as an example, they're forecasting a sort of a 6 million deficit when it comes to skills and talent, which is a big issue when you think about the investment that's going into the US at the moment. So are they going to be able to supply talent to be able to fulfill all the investment that's going into the US market? On the flip side of that, you've got countries like India, where they have they have a huge amount of talent over there, which is fantastic. So we're seeing a lot more movement around, not necessarily about movement of talent, but fundamentally a movement of where we're going to host and support our businesses. So we're seeing a lot of offshore centers running it, and so on and so forth, because there's sort of no choice really to an extent. I do quite a lot of work in the Irish market over in Ireland. I don't know if any of you have been to Dublin, for example. And Dublin is a wonderful place. It's a beautiful place, and full of great opportunity. There's lots of American businesses doing a lot of work over in Ireland, and so on and so forth. But the big issue in the Irish market is there's no housing. So they can't bring talent into the Irish market, as beautiful as it is, because there's literally nowhere for them to sleep, which is almost crazy when you think about it. So again, we're starting to see, even in a small population like Ireland, we're starting to see people now move their central services outside of the core centres like Dublin and Belfast and into the more sort of regional areas. And I know that's been very much a trend over in the US, and Charlie, you could probably talk more to that than I can, but we're starting to see a lot more of that as well. So I suppose my opening line to this sort of conversation is that there's definitely an issue at the moment with talent shortages, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. There are a list of things and a bunch of things which we can talk to over the course of this session, where what are people doing to try and fix that and solve that. I'm very happy to share that with you, or some of the ideas I've seen. But that'll be my initial intro, I suppose. It's not great news, Megan. I suppose there's a talent shortage, and I don't think the robots are going to fix it. So we need to come up with better strategies and better ways of solving this problem. Otherwise, it will just anchor our ability to grow our organizations, which is obviously what we're all here to do.
If you're a business that is expanding internationally, or maybe you can sort of direct this to the wider group, because this is something that's come up in our world quite a bit as well. How do you decide what to do to solve that greater problem around the talent shortages? What countries to look at and so on. I know we asked a similar question last week actually to you, Becky, I think, actually, when we were sort of selecting service providers and vendors, but it's a similar question with regards to talent. Now that the world is kind of open to hire, how would you recommend that, what do people need to think about when they're hiring internationally?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to sort of jump in on that one. There's I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Staffing Industry Analyst, SIA. I don't know if that comes across to the US or not, but the SIA produce a report every year about the top 10, top 50, top 30 countries to basically work in recruitment in, as in to recruit in, based on a whole bunch of different criteria, such as sort of the size of the talent population, demands, ease to work, political stability, and so it goes on, So there's a really interesting report. So certainly when I'm advising recruitment organizations about where they should be focusing their time and attention and where the biggest opportunities are, we look at the SIA reports and say, actually, well, where in the world right now are real hot spots to be working in, to be recruiting in, etc. If you look at places like some parts of Europe, for example, it's very different from maybe what it was 5-10 years ago. A, because of the movement of talent, B, because of the war and things that's going on in Ukraine, etc., etc. And it really does change a lot about the talent footprint based on what's going on economically. So if everyone is happy for me to do so, and Chris, I'll do this via you and Emma, I'll see if I can get a copy of the latest SIA report on the sort of the international hotspots to have a look at, and I'll share that with you all if that's of any use, and that might give you some insights and ideas.
That would be really helpful, because one of the things, and again, we sort of touched on this, but about not necessarily recruiting, but other areas last week. And I think what tends to happen is, I've seen this firsthand, is a lot of HR leaders will tend to kind of start looking internationally, but they'll only really think to ask around, cost and availability of talent, whereas it's obviously a lot deeper than that as to decide where to go. There's a lot more to it and a lot more things that need to be considered. Becky, again, this similar to last week, it might be worth bringing you in on this as well, because I know you've hired across multiple countries. So keen to get your insights.
Probably the one thing I would add to what's already been shared today is I'm trying to think about how to articulate this. Not every skill set is available everywhere. And so you may say, oh, we would like to have a development team in X country, but that skill set may not be something that is widely available. Certainly there could be some people with that, but a robust talent pool may not be available. And we actually had found that in many cases, a specific skill set. So I think we probably take it for granted a little bit in the US. Just big country, large population, that you could find skill sets anywhere you want to look, but that's actually not true, especially when you start looking globally. The other thing is, it's not just talent and skill set, it is cost. So one of the reasons why we really looked internationally is, yes, we could find that skill set in North America, for example, US or Canada, but we could hire 3 of those people if we went internationally for the same cost. And so that's another consideration, is just kind of the matchup between skill sets and cost. You could go to a low cost country or perceived low cost country, but the skill set you're looking for is in really high demand. And now that is a higher cost skill set. And so I think in the US, I would just say that's not necessarily the market that we live and work in, and just being aware of that as you're going into the global economy, that there is just going to be a nature of having to be flexible. And potentially one of our strategies was necessarily more focused on time zone. Okay, we need somebody in the EMEA time zone, and it could be in these 10 countries. And so looking at that versus picking something very specific, because oftentimes you're not going to find it. If it's too narrow, too specific, they have to be in Madrid, or they can be in EMEA within, a 2-hour plane ride of Madrid. Then you're going to get a much larger talent pool. And being more flexible and open to that as you're starting the recruitment search, we found a lot more success. For example, we had a big office in Spain. We ended up hiring a bunch of people in Lisbon, Portugal. Not far. They could get there, go there for 2 days a week, that type of thing, very cost effective and very similar salary ranges, but really opened the talent pool. And we found some fantastic people once we kind of opened up the geography search. So that would be my main takeaway, is just being a little more flexible and looking more time zones in specific countries.
Becky, can I ask a question off the back of that, please? And this is probably for everybody on the call. I'm fascinated by this, because I absolutely agree with you. And I think, it used to be the days where you'd recruit someone who was within 2 hours commute of your office, and now it's within a 2-hour time difference of your office, which I think is quite exciting. However, and certainly what we've heard over here in the UK about what's going on in the US, for example, there's lots more of a drag of bringing people back into the office. So does that not go against the strategy of being flexible to be able to find people who are more remote or in different variations and that type of stuff? I'm really, really curious, because we're seeing this in the UK as well, where we've got people saying we get more productivity if people are back in the office, so let's bring them back in. But then to the point then when them creating our own talent shortage issues by doing so. What are you seeing over in the US about that, and how is that being managed?
I mean, my own personal perspective is I've actually been with 2 different companies who have brought people back into the office, and we didn't have one person quit. Everybody threatened to quit. People wanted to quit. People said they were going to quit, but actually quit once they come back into the office is 0. So that's my own perspective. I can only share, and that's actually on a global scale as well, because we did that globally.
Do you think that would change? Because obviously at the moment we're in a slightly volatile global market from an economic perspective. If we were back in a boom market, that maybe like we were post-COVID, do you think that might be different?
I do. I think the balance of the skills has tipped more in favor of the employer right now. I also think it's not asking people to come back in 5 days a week, coming back in 2 days a week. Most people can do that. And it was this similar when we were hiring in Portugal. We said, hey, can you come to Spain, 2 days a week? And everyone said, yeah, 2 days a week, I can do that. I can be away from my kids. I could figure out my own personal life. 2 days is a reasonable ask. So that, I think that also factored into the success. That's my own personal experience.
I was just going to ask you guys, sort of off the back of that, the changes in the workforce. And I know we've got a separate session as well about remote, hybrid, and office work. So that kind of ties really nicely into that as well, actually. And I've already had a whole bunch of questions related to that even ahead of the next event. But just with that in mind, are you guys, from a technology standpoint, have you, since the world's changed and everyone's hiring remotely, what have you actually changed within your recruitment process now in the last sort of couple of years, since now that you're hiring internationally? What's changed?
Yeah, no, definitely. So one thing I've seen from this side is, and Becky, you kind of touched on it too, and I think James, you did too, is about the nearshoring, offshoring conversation. So especially as you sit here, look in the US, like as COVID went, salaries went crazy. They haven't quite recovered, but companies need to change their strategy on how they hit their growth objectives. So that's where the nearshoring, offshoring conversations come in. And what I find is people are much more open to locations. So they're looking for that style of guidance of, hey, I know I can't hire these roles or this team in the US anymore. Where should I go? And Becky, to your point, then you start kind of pulling back the onion. Well, what's important? Is it time zone coverage? Is it skills shortage? Is it fluency of English? And really narrowing that down to understand, hey, where are the pockets we should look at? But then there's the complexity on top of that is, especially and this is very much a US standpoint, is we have employment at will. Hey, we don't like someone 2 weeks, you're out. That doesn't exist outside of the US. So really working with companies and organizations, helping them understand the complexity of employment as you go into Latin and South America, as you go across Europe, because it doesn't quite exist. So it's weighing all those factors in, because although in the US, the employer social cost is 12 to 18%, depending on what country you're in. Well, you go down to Argentina, it's 75%. So, okay, yeah, the talent availability is there and the salary is much lower, but when you start laying in those additional costs and what it looks to terminate, like taking all that into consideration. So I feel like the nearshoring, offshoring conversation is very prevalent. People are thinking about it, but it's very much, oh, okay, let's just do it. Well, okay, you got to really pull back the onion and look at everything underneath to understand where it is. What does it look like? Do you need an office? Do you not? Is it hybrid? Like taking all those factors in, because cultural differences are so robust and different as well. So that's where I see a lot of it is, hey, we know we need to start hiring internationally, but where do we go? So they need that front end support, that guidance.
I have something to add here, actually, myself, because one of the things off the back of your point, Charlie, so something that a few things came up in the last couple of weeks on the previous roundtables where people have been burned by nasty surprises. So the last week's one was all around blind spots when you're going internationally, and there was a whole bunch of stuff that came up, such as even things like legal the risk around severance packages when you need to exit employees, and obviously with the hire at will policies in the US, when you have US companies moving out, not necessarily aware of the ins and outs of the risks related to that when they go internationally. The other thing that I've seen a trend on as well is when people move into, say, just for example, some Latin American countries. Mexico is a prime example, actually, where a lot of companies move into Mexico a couple of years ago, where cost was at least one of the heavily weighted factors as to why they went into that country. And then, within 12 months, many of the salary levels doubled, or upward of doubled. And then companies were getting into a question of, well, do we keep hiring in Mexico? We've already got a lot of people there, or do we need to look internationally? But then you've got a remote model across other countries, so it can become kind of quite complex. And I think one of the things that a lot of people can do up front, and a lot of HR leaders can do up front, is ask more questions about, strategically, where do we want to go into for the long term, rather than just looking at the kind of short term needs for talent. Maybe where's cheapest, where do you find the talent, and kind of hit the button. It almost needs to be a little bit more sort of thought through than that. Tash, I was going to ask you a question. It's almost like you joined on cue. I know you're looking to expand your business out from Poland into Portugal, and from a sort of talent point of view, have you got any sort of specific I know that's kind of a bit more specific around Portugal, but I'm just curious if you've got any questions specifically around acquiring talent in a new country such as Portugal as you expand.
Yeah, I think the last time I was in a room and Becky was here, she gave me some really good advice about, you have to do your research. I think what the struggle that we have is the time that it takes to do that research, and not having the resources, not knowing locally, like, where's the best job board to post your role? What forums do people use? Do people look for jobs on Facebook? Because people do now. Like, I think knowing where and knowing what the best place is to advertise, knowing what the local standards are in regards to benefits are, I think. But from a recruitment standpoint, definitely, where are we advertising locally?
Natasha, if you don't mind, I can jump in on that actually. So we did an exercise that's been really fruitful actually with quite a few of the companies that we work with. They're on the agency side, but they're trying to figure out where are the best place to go to find this talent, where are they hanging out, what sort of content are they consuming, what social media platforms they're on. And if you work in marketing, you always produce a customer avatar before you start your marketing campaign. So you literally draw out a picture of the ideal customer, and based on that, you then identify all those factors and everything else. What we've seen incredibly successful is in any recruitment strategy, if you start with a candidate avatar and you literally build out the ideal perfect candidate, if there is such a thing, their profile, and you ask all those questions. So we actually ran some user groups across some of the companies that we work with, who went out to their existing candidate pool and said, tell me, where do you spend your time? What do you do? Where do you go? Where do you consume content? What sort of questions do you ask? There's a really interesting or quite clever tool called answerthepublic.com. I presume it covers across into the US as well. But basically, it tracks actually key terminology and phrases and expressions that people are asking on Google, for example, when they're under particular search topics. So let's say it's about, I'm looking for Python developer jobs, as an example, in Poland. It will tell me all the exact wording and terminology that people are utilizing to search for those. So that now gives me a really clear insight into actually how people are trying to find jobs. And then I can my strategy is aligned to what people are actually looking for, if that makes any sense. So really highly recommend building out a candidate profile, a candidate avatar. I presume you may well do this already, so apologies if that sounds patronizing, but it's definitely worthwhile doing. And then do a user group and basically say, just talk to me. You guys are all developers in Portugal right now. Where do you go? Where do you spend your time? And so on and so forth. And I find that a really useful starting point before you run any campaign on the back of that.
That's really useful, James. Actually, I had a question, James, that came up from last week. Losing my memory now. I think it might come up the conversation with someone a few days ago when they were asking, why is there still a norm to use resumes or use CVs, as we would say here in England or Europe? So in terms of what other ways, or will there be a shift in the way people kind of enter a process at that early stage, rather than submitting several pages of notes on their background? Have you got any thoughts around that?
I've got a really strong opinion about it. I think the resume is dead. I'm absolutely convinced by it. So many organizations, so many business leaders that I engage with, We don't use CVs or resumes anymore at all. There are other ways of assessing people. I think by using CV, I mean, bear in mind, I can get Chat GPT to write my CV for me anyway, sort of stuff. So is it a real representation of who I am as a person? Probably not. We, in a talent short market, we absolutely hire for potential. I mean, it's critical to us. So I rather look for people's potential and be able to train them to be able to do the job, as opposed to look for someone who's got X amount of experience or X years of history and so on and so forth. So I think a resume is dead personally. I don't see it. So if you look at TikTok, I mean, TikTok's a classic example. TikTok are part of their strategy is they think that there won't be CVs or resumes in the future. You have TikToks instead, is their philosophy. So LinkedIn, as LinkedIn is at the moment, which is basically a recruitment tool, TikTok will also become a recruitment platform, and you will search for people based on TikToks and based on certain algorithms, determining and based on all sorts of things. You know, we're seeing it now also with, there's some technology that's come out of Japan recently, which is all about how you assess someone based on their facial technology, on facial recognition technology and that type of stuff. Whether it's right or wrong, whether there's an issue, me too, Natasha, don't worry. Whether that's an issue when it comes to things like bias and that type of stuff is obviously the big question mark at the moment and that type of stuff. But no, the reality is, I think paper-based CV type concepts are long, long gone. I think we just use them at the moment because it's an easy way to track data against data. Here's a job spec. You know, we've got people at the moment in the UK who literally, they get a job spec, they run it through Chat GPT, it creates the questions for them, they put a bunch of candidates, it then tracks who's got those skill sets, sticks the two together, even then sends a message out to them afterwards saying, you've got the skill set, let's have a conversation. Anyway, it's very, very archaic, I think. And it means you're just significantly limiting the talent pool to someone who's got, you know, A plus A, it has to equal the same thing. Whereas, you know, if you look at, I look at my business, if I look at the majority of people who work for us, A, I didn't recruit them on their CV and resume, and B, if I had, they probably wouldn't have got the job. But they're some of my highest performing people because they've got an amazing skill set, and from an attitudinal point of view, from a learning perspective, from a potential point of view. And that to me is worth its weight in gold, especially in the talent short market. My personal, that's an opinion. I'm clearly very opinionated about it. No science behind that one, I'm afraid. I'm just very opinionated about it.
I'm sorry, guys. I just wanted, I'm sorry, Chris, I know that you had to say something, but I interrupted anyway, sorry. So I'm actually on the other side of recruitment or hiring. I work for career services for the American University, and I have nothing but talent around me walking around. And so I actually work for Rochester Institute of Technology. I'm not trying to advertise anything, but from the standpoint of talent and young people, and trying to send them for cooperative education or internships. So I have personally a load of about over 1,000 students in computer science. And so their requirement to graduate is to have 3 co-ops, which means that they have to get internships someplace in the world. They have a really hard time finding international co-ops because they have lots of different red tape around them. First of all, of course, it's housing. Second of all, it's visas and things like that. But they are very willing and open to go and work in some large companies. They have previous experience. They have all of those fancy software that they've been using. They know how to program. But I just want to basically gauge that understanding of whether it will actually become better for my students to find those co-ops. They're I want to say not very expensive at this point because they're just early careers. And they do have resumes, unfortunately, James, because I don't think that it's for every major to actually create a TikTok, because again, maybe for marketing, it's okay, but for software developers, I probably would never make them do that.
And by the way, I'm not suggesting we should make that fundamentally clear. I'm an old man. I can't make TikToks myself. It wouldn't work.
Yes, but getting this information to my students would be amazing for the companies that actually are looking for the developers. Would be absolutely terrific. Thank you, guys. I'm sorry. It's wonderful meeting you all too.
But I think you touched on a really important point there, Anna, is that, if we go back to one of the early questions we had was around the talent shortage. I think we do a wonderful job of putting in far too many barriers for people to enter into the workforce. And this is our talent of tomorrow. This is the talent of the future, which I find incredulous. I really, really do. In the same way, we make it very easy for older populations to leave the workforce as well. We're sort of creating a barrier at one end and a sort of a hole in the bucket at the other end, which is one of the biggest issues that we're facing right now. And I think those organizations who are more creative in how they are engaging with students, I think will win the war for talent to some extent. I'm absolutely convinced by it.
So now that there is a shortage of talent, which is, an ongoing topic, as James says, is likely to get worse, not better necessarily in a sense. How do you sort of balance this when you're looking for really difficult to find roles? I'm kind of thinking of Tash, for example, I know you hire a lot of tech talent, Becky similarly, and also picking up with you, Megan, as well. In your world, I know there's some people that are really, really rare to find. So I'm just kind of curious what you're currently doing about this particular challenge to overcome it when you've got some really difficult roles to fill where multiple companies are going after them.
I can jump in. We design and manufacture semiconductor technology here, and so we have to we have a centralized workforce. As you can imagine, we've got a production plant here in Victoria, BC, and so for the most part, when we think about our global talent acquisition strategy, it's actually finding global talent, because our domestic talent market is so small, that has and holds the really rare and unique skill set that is required in our really niche little corner of the semiconductor industry. We use cadmium, zinc, and tellurium to build crystals that then go into semiconductor technology. So it's very, very rare. And so to your point, Chris, we have to have a really open and global mind. We align ourselves with universities all over the world that have these kind of deep science and deep technology and deep engineering programs. We align ourselves with government and industry associations or programs that fund or sponsor some of this really innovative technology and science. Those are a couple of the things that we have to do to make sure that we are getting sort of a pipeline of these types of rare scientists and engineers. And then we also spend a lot of effort around investing in I can't remember who said it just earlier here, but actually I think it was you, James, investing or hiring for potential and then growing and training them here, because the expertise is so rare for us to find. So the people that have it and hold it in our organization become the sort of industry mentors, and so we bring people up through the ranks here as another strategy.
Makes a lot of sense. And just once you've actually managed to attract and onboard these people, which I know is the first and probably the biggest challenge in the first instance, do you do anything differently to retain them as well? Because the reason I asked the question, I'm thinking about different pockets of hiring, when different stories that I've heard in the last couple of years where people kind of know their value's gone up, they know and so on, and they quick to take that and go off elsewhere. Is there anything specific you've done to address that?
We do a couple of things. So we pay people well. We have to. We understand where we sit and sort of what some of the limitations are, and what some of the factors are that are in the for us column, and some of them that are in the against us column. And then we offset our comp strategy based on that. And because the talent that we're looking for is so rare, we understand that we have to pay a lot for it. So there's that, but we also do a large immigration support. So we fund people and their families to move to Canada, which is a really big deal for people, as you can imagine, changing their lives completely, bringing their families over and kind of starting a new life, if you will, for a company is an absolutely massive life decision. And so we try to make that process a whole lot easier and smoother and more comfortable for people. So there are a couple of things that jump to mind.
Has anyone else got anything to add around that? Becky, again, I know that's something sort of in your world, or Tash, I don't know if you've got anything to add there. I just specifically know you've had similar challenges.
I can speak for the challenges that we faced. is difficult, you know, in a smaller company where you have one or two people who perform that role, to hire a brand new, you know, student out of college or somebody really new in their career. And that was always the challenge we faced. You needed somebody with years of experience. Okay, so how do you start pipelining that new talent into the organization? Because that person may or may not stay for a long time, or they might be more getting to the end of their career. So what we did is we focused on internships in very specific areas where we would bring in students who were either in university, recently, you know, graduated, looking for an internship to graduate, and try to, what we did was created a program where they could learn from us, get pipelined in the organization, but also create some aspects where they're performing meaningful work. Because that's the challenge. I would say that's always been the challenge with the pipelining the new talent is you have one person who does the role, can they really take on an intern and do it effectively? So we focused on some very specific areas within our technology department, not the highly specialized, more of the general areas where people could ramp up more quickly. And we had more team members that could focus. And so it was just, it really was a balance for us. I'm finding at my new organization as well, the workforce is, you know, aging out. And so how do you pipeline those people in that also don't then kind of take down the productivity as well? And so I think being very specific and targeted in roles where we can do that really has been the key from what I've found.
Really interesting. Just before we move on, Tash, have you got anything to add to that? So the reason I'm coming to you is I know that you've hired various sort of tech talent in different areas, and I just know from experience that's a constant problem. So I'm just curious what you found at TaskRabbit.
It is. It's so competitive. Continues to be. I think one of the things we really emphasize on is the level of impact that someone can have, and I think, especially depending on wherever you are in your career, really, I think being able to compete with Google for a software engineer is difficult, but then speaking to them and making them realize that yes, you might be on slightly less money, but can't afford to pay what Google pays, but at the same time, the level of impact that you're going to see and the work that you're going to be able to do is very vastly different, because you're in a team of 50, actually not even 50, you're in a much smaller team, you're having direct impact into the product, and you know, with the code that you're able to write, rather than, you know, being in such a huge company and just being one tiny piece of that. I think as well, like I've been at TaskRabbit for over 5 years now, the culture is something that when you join, you realize that there is something really special. I think trying to achieve those company goals is one thing, but being able to maintain not a startup culture by any means, but just there's a very special thing that is quite hard to describe. And I think we do a really good job of putting that across in our interviews as well. And because people really believe and really enjoy coming into work or being at work, living at work, working from home and living at work is the same thing now. But yeah, I think just the messaging when we're recruiting and communicating that impact level has been key to successful hires.
Just how are you guys assessing your talent any differently? So I know in the tech world, for example, there's that constant kind of, you know, if you're talking about developers and things like that, there's always this sort of fine balance between assessing, over assessing, and frankly acquiring the talent that you need when they've got several offers on the table. So I mean that's just one point. You know, I'm referencing the tech world, but I know that's the same in any kind of difficult area to recruit in. So have any of you got any thoughts or guidance as to what you've done to kind of tread that, fine line between assessing and over-assessing, I suppose the best way to put it?
We really shortened our interview processes and the interview lengths there. I remember when I joined, and I joined in a much more junior role quite a while ago, I had 9 interviews, which is just insane. So no one should ever do that. Don't put someone through that. And it's the same with the tech roles, shortening the process is having panels rather than having one-on-one interviews, and doing live assessments as well in a shorter time. I think just really condensing down and making that process quicker allows you to get to offer much quicker.
Okay.
We always joke about this when we work with recruitment agencies, and we sort of say, in the space of 10 seconds, I can walk into Starbucks, get a coffee with my name on it, pay for it with my name on it, and walk out again in 10 seconds. I can get married, or I can find my future partner by swiping left and swiping right. And yet, in order to try and apply for a job, I have to go through about 450 different hurdles to do that sort of stuff. And we find it amazing. So I think, again, making that user experience for a job seeker the whole way through the process to make it as frictionless as possible. And I often ask, certainly on the agency side, I often say to agency recruiters, just go and apply for a job with your own company, as if you were a candidate, and just tell me how painful that experience was. And now that's one of the reasons potentially why you're hemorrhaging great talent that's just not going through the process. So I do think it's a really good exercise. I'm sure, Natasha, I'm sure, and all of you, I'm sure you've all done this, but just go and apply for a job with your own company and see what it's like. And if you can't do it in the same time as finding your future partner and getting a coffee, then maybe it's probably not as fit for purpose for what we expect these days and how we do things, I suppose.
Well, what do you see any shift as well between between kind of internal talent acquisition and the external agency world, given what you do? Have you got any views around that?
Shift in what respect?
So in terms of any kind of dynamic changes between sort of working with recruitment agencies versus what internal TA is now responsible for, do you think that's shifted in any way?
Yeah, so I was over at I was in Ireland beginning of the year speaking at a conference, and there was about 2,000 people, I think it was, and it was a blend of agency recruiters and HR directors and talent acquisition, that type of stuff. So basically, it was almost like, if those of you like the West Side Story, it's like the Sharks and the Jets, one on each side sort of stuff, and they should never merge together. And my whole presentation was entitled Collaboration, because I fervently believe the biggest challenges we face are external challenges that we've been talking about today. So talent shortages, our ability to engage people, salary issues, etc., etc. And yet we don't see enough of agencies and organizations collaborating more together to solve that problem. So that you end up with relationships which are very much sort of almost like antagonistic between an agency and a customer, and vice versa. And it just doesn't work. I mean, it really doesn't work. Where we've seen organizations over here in the UK who've done proper partnerships, strategic partnerships with their agency suppliers, and it just works. I mean, they're solving the problem. They really, really are. The agency suppliers are out there properly representing their brand, helping them with their employee brand proposition, making them famous in front of their communities and their networks, and that type of stuff, feeding them with the insights and the data. And I really love that when that happens. I don't see enough of that, sadly, probably because the agency world are all salespeople. So, that you're being banged on the door every day by a bunch of agency recruiters trying to flog you stuff. Like, I totally understand that. But when we do collaborate, I think we can solve the problems, or a larger percentage of the problems that we're facing at the moment. That's got to be good for everybody involved in the process: candidates, clients, agencies, everyone, I think.
What do you think? Do you have any specific thoughts? I think it was Tash from memory earlier that mentioned something. Someone mentioned something about different ways of attracting people in different countries, and obviously there are different tools, different job boards, different ways of working. Have you got any sort of general comments around technologies people are now using, other than the obvious LinkedIn and so on, to actually get people into their process in the first instance?
Well, yeah, and it's interesting. Again, it goes a little bit back to what we talked about before about the avatars and stuff, and actually understanding where people are hanging out. I think our natural default is to go to LinkedIn, which is why LinkedIn have such a monopoly on the world of talent, and sadly, it's true. But the reality is a lot of the job seekers that we're targeting don't do that. So if you look, for example, in 2025, I think it's something like 82% of the workforce will be millennials or some statistic like that. I'm probably out by about 20% on that one, but you get the rough idea. So a large majority of the workforce are going to be millennials. You then ask yourself the question, well, how do millennials like to interact with organizations? There's been some research done that says 41% of millennials don't like to communicate with someone over the telephone or face-to-face. So there has to be, therefore, well, surely it makes sense then to have chatbots or utilize bots or some form or other way of interacting so people can do it in their own time, in their own style, and how they want to do it. Many organizations aren't set up to do that. Similarly, if I was recruiting, for example, a salesperson in a business, there's a thing called showcase searching. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that or any of you ever recruit salespeople, but if you're trying to find a really great salesperson, the last place I would look is on LinkedIn. And the first place I would go to would be Instagram or now X, because that's where the top salespeople go to show off about the fact they're currently in Las Vegas on the incentive trip because they just won the President's Club and then they're with the other top 20 salespeople. So I can use technology to plug into Instagram to basically track and trace and pull data of the top salespeople, not because they told me they are on LinkedIn, it's because they actually are on Instagram, which is why they're currently in Vegas on the incentive trip. So again, it goes back into that thing of where are the people we're trying to target and what are we doing to get inside the communities, the area that they are communicating in. And that's a very left field example, but hopefully that explains my point, I suppose.
Great, it's really insightful. I just have one more question to you, James, around this sort of topic. So is there any sort of legacy ways of working that you think people should stop doing? That you talked about resumes already, we talked about LinkedIn, that's been kind of the go-to. Do you think there's anything that people should stop doing?
Can I answer this in a slightly different way? And apologies if this doesn't answer the question properly. And it's just my opinion on this. And whenever I get a chance to share my opinion, I'm always going to take it, I think. We've done a lot of work in the last 12 months with all sorts of organizations all around what we refer to as optimization. So I think many organizations at the moment just generally aren't optimized. They are sub-optimized. They're not run as effective as they could do. Generally, great organizations run a hell of a lot better when you're in a sort of a downturn. When you're in a boom marketplace, we generally run our businesses really badly because we can get away with it. I think a lot of recruitment processes are sub-optimized at the moment. I think we're not doing enough, and this is please make sure this is not reflecting on anybody on this call right now. But I've worked with HR directors and talent organizations where you look at their businesses, and the reality is they're not doing half the things that they should be doing to retain their talent already, to get more engagement out of their talent, the redeployment of their talent, to upskill their talent they've already got. So we're spending quite a lot of time with the traditional, let's go and find more, bring it into the business. And I think there could be more time spent on redeployment, reevaluation of the actual processes that we're running, retraining, reskilling, all that type of stuff. I think there's so much untapped talent within our businesses that I think we're sort of choosing to ignore almost by accident or by default. And I think so. What should we stop doing? I would say actually stop looking outside the four walls of your office until you're convinced that you haven't got the talent inside your business or the potential within your business to create that talent. And that would be my 2 pence. It's probably a bigger picture left field answer to your question, Chris, but I'm quite passionate about that because I see it in my own business, I see it in other organizations that, we sometimes just miss, we're not as optimized as we need to be. And I think we could do a lot better.
I think coming back to my point earlier as well, I think what's complicated things a little bit more now is that maybe hiring in the past in general terms, you kind of roughly know what country you're hiring in, what you're looking for in general terms. It might be replacements for people leaving the business or to upscale a team. Now there's just so many more questions around where you're actually going to place the talent, what those local market norms are, how do you adjust your talent attraction strategy in different countries all of the world, how do you adjust to the culture. So I think actually there's a kind of more complex, hiring is a little bit more complicated than it used to be in that sense as well, right?
Well, yeah, I was on a round table this morning in UK time this morning with a whole bunch of people, and we were talking about employee engagement, staff engagement. And there's the in the UK here we have a thing called the CIPD, which is sort of like the governing body for HR directors in the UK, and some of you may know it. There's currently a big CIPD conference going on in the UK at the moment, and there's a lot of data being spouted around, obviously coming out of that. One of which was that 10% of the workforce are currently engaged. So let me rephrase that: only 10% of the workforce are currently engaged. So if engagement in some way equates to productivity, then you could probably argue about the fact that a large percentage of our workforce aren't being as productive as they could be. So how do you do that? Well, what most people are doing is they're trying to flog their staff more to get more out of them, make them work longer hours, etc. I can't help thinking if we can solve the problem around engagement and make them more engaged and then fall in love with their job more, then potentially we might get more productivity, which means maybe we might actually have more of the people within our business or more of the capacity within our business as well.
So just a couple of things to add. So first of all, just to mention that Emma, I believe, has sent you all the link to the WhatsApp group. So please do join it so we can carry on this conversation and other conversations relating to problems you may have as HR leaders and how to solve them. So just wanted to mention that there are 3 more roundtables in this series. You should all have the links to them. If you want to sign up, if any of the topics are relevant, please feel free. As I just mentioned, we are also coming up with a new series in the new year, which will start in January, second half of January after Christmas and everything. So if anyone's got anything specific on their mind that they want to raise, do let me know, and we'll put that into the agenda as we start to kind of plan those out. And just one final thing from my side is that we will be inviting you all to follow-up sessions, just for similar to what we offered actually before the event, really just to debrief, get your feedback on the sessions, see if there's any specific challenges or topics that you want us to kind of look into or help out with. I think I mentioned right at the top, a couple of things came out of the first roundtables, and we've already done some one-to-one follow-ups around helping some people with some very specific areas that they need help when they're moving internationally. So we'll offer those out if you want to attend those. And I think that's pretty much it from me. So thank you all very much for attending, and hopefully see you on the next one.
Fantastic. Lovely to meet you all. Thank you very much, Chris.